kind of got me into the wellness and the ongoing fitness. So that's just so you know where I came from. So today we're talking about equine fitness, and specifically back to work after the COVID-19, and then what it means to be eventing fit. So what does fitness mean to everybody? If we look at the quote unquote definition, it is the condition of being physically fit and healthy. For me, for our horses, this is more the ability to perform the job that we ask them to do without causing them undue pain or physical stress or fatigue. So I think everybody's pretty familiar with fitness in that respect. As eventers, I think we also have a pretty good understanding of fitness from a cardiovascular standpoint. We know that we need the strength and the flexibility and the power for dressage, much like ballet dancers. They have to be incredibly strong and incredibly flexible. And then we know that we need cardiovascular fitness for the endurance phase for cross country. I think the one that we often do a disservice to is the absence of fatigue on day 3, where we ask those horses to show dexterity and control and power for the stadium jumping. And so I think for me, that's really where most of us fall down. So I mentioned it briefly, but Equestrian Canada released their back to competition guidelines, and it is a fantastic document. If you haven't read it, please give it a read. It does an excellent job of explaining fitness levels, where horses should be at. It's a fantastic starting point, but it's pretty generic. There is specific discipline sections in there, but it's pretty generic, right? So let's dive a little deeper. Any thoughts or questions so far before we dive in?
I also wanted to say that we'll, when we're recording this, so we'll be adding this link together with the video when we do post this. So for easy access for people that haven't had a chance to look at the EC document.
Super. Okay, great. Oh, I hit something. Hold on, team. Oh, there we go. Okay, so why are we concerned about fitness after a break? So any break in exercise can cause a change in fitness level. I think we've all experienced that when maybe we don't ride for a couple of weeks over Christmas or whatever. Horses, the good news is horses don't lose fitness as fast as people do. They're born athletes, we know this. And over the last few years, research has shown, at least on a physiologic level, that it's about 17 days before any real deficit is noted. About 4 to 8 weeks off really should only move them down one fitness level. Now, the caveat to that is provided they had a baseline level of fitness and they were in a regular program for 6 to 12 months prior. So if you were just bringing your horse back from an injury and then unfortunately had to take a break for COVID reasons, that doesn't apply. Then all bets are off. So if they've been in consistent training program, then we've got 4 to 8 weeks that they only really lose one level of fitness. That's awesome, right? No. So this is a picture of me on the top of Miss Mountain. The reason that this is in here is because really what the talk is about today is fatigue. Was I ready for this hike? No, not at all. Did I do it? Yeah, I sure did. Was I sore? You bet I was sore. And what was really important about that is thinking about recovery time. I also happened to do my first triathlon the day before, so I was really in rough shape. But the point is recovery. So everyone's going to say, well, fatigue, I thought we were talking about fitness, and we are, but it's a really important part of fitness. So most of us, I would hope, are aware of kind of heart rate and interval training. As eventers, I think we're really quite good at doing our trot and our canter sets. I've ridden more trot and canter sets than I care to recall at this point in my life, and it is super important, but it's not the whole story. So the picture at the bottom of my screen here is, I think I was about 15 in this picture, and this was the first hunt of the year. So getting the horses hunting fit, we're pretty good at. There was lots of roads and trotting, and we were good at that. Respiratory rate and cardiovascular fitness, I think, again, as eventers, we're pretty good at that. We understand it. What about mental and physical fatigue? What about horses that are a little bit stiff the next day? What about horses that are a little bit slow to warm up? I hear all the time in my practice, oh, that's just him. Well, is it? Or have we got some long-term fatigue going on? What about behavioral changes? Horses that maybe struggle with their focus a little bit? Or what about a change in gait? So let's talk about gait. There's 3 types of contractions that muscles can do. There's the isometric contraction, and this one's a little bit weird to understand, but it's really when the muscle doesn't change length. It contracts, but there's no joints moving. It doesn't, the joint spaces don't close or open, and the 2 ends of the muscles don't get closer or further apart. That's called isometric contraction. Then we have concentric contraction, which is the one that most of us are more familiar with. So that's your classic, if you imagine me in the gym with my huge, can you see my huge bicep? And so that's the classic one, right? When we think about Arnold. And then the other one that we struggle to think about a little bit is called eccentric contraction. So that's when the muscle is contracting, but the 2 ends of the muscle are actually moving away from each other. So if you think about when I lift my weight with my bicep, the muscle on the bottom here, the tricep, is still contracting. It's opposing that force, but it's actually getting longer. And the reason that it's important to think about this is so I titled this slide, Why Do We Care? When do most injuries happen? Most injuries happen under eccentric contraction, and eccentric contraction is increased with fatigue. So again, I'm back to prevention of injury to our horses and their ability to recover. And we want to see an absence of fatigue. So for me, a horse that is fit is able to recover without fatigue. So that's kind of the importance of where we're going. So I would really encourage you to use this time to really evaluate your horse. So when you ride, do you monitor heart rate? Some people do. There's lots of apps out there. You can get ones on your cell phone. You can get the little clip-on ones. That's great. Some people just take a pulse. I'm old school. I just take a pulse. Nothing wrong with any of that. But I would also encourage you to pay attention to your warm up and cool down and consider your recovery. And we're going to talk a little bit about why. So when we think about warm up, what is the purpose of a warm up? I think some of us are a bit guilty, and I've done this in the past. We get on and we walk 3 rounds one direction, 3 rounds the other direction, and then get on with our work. What is the purpose of a warm up? And the physiological purpose of the warm up is to enhance blood flow to the muscles. It improves enzyme function. So really it changes the metabolism of the body. And the really important one is it increases range of motion. So remember we talked about those eccentric contractions that can be a problem for injury. If we can increase our range of motion, we're going to decrease our chance of injury. And so essentially warm up is warning the body that exercise is going to happen and prepare it accordingly. For those of you that delve into physiology a little bit more, this is where we switch from what's called glycogen in the muscle to using the blood glucose. And it takes the body a little bit of time to do that. It needs to get ready and change some enzymes. And we'll touch on that in a minute here. What if our horses had residual fatigue? What if they had a really hard ride yesterday? The warm-up may need to be increased in time to help remove waste products from the tissue. So I think a lot of people are familiar with lactic acid, and we've all felt that lactic acid buildup when we've hiked up a mountain when we shouldn't, or we've gone to the gym when we shouldn't. That's that soreness that you feel in your muscles the next day is lactic acid buildup. And we need a little bit of muscle overwork to build it. But if we get too much, it can be damaging. So maybe we need to warm up a little longer. If we pay attention to the warm up, we can adjust our goals for the ride that day. Maybe we work smarter and not harder. Maybe we choose a different activity. Remember, we can really fit in our horses from a cardiovascular standpoint just by walking. So maybe we choose to do that. Maybe we choose a different activity. What about cool down? Why do we cool our horses down? We want to take that residual heat away from the tissues. Has anybody heard of what we call the second sweat? Just give me some thumbs up or some thumbs down or something. Yeah, so second sweat is kind of, it's where the horses do their exercise, they sweat, we're all familiar with that, we hose them off, they get put in the stall, and then they start sweating again. It's pretty common. The big gluteal muscles can get up to 43 degrees at the core when they're exercising. And so often it takes a long time. Sweating just takes the heat away at the surface. So often it takes a long time to cool those horses properly. And guess what? It removes those waste products, and cooling down your horse appropriately reduces chance of injury again. So I think we're all saying, okay, maybe we better pay attention to this. So that's great. So now what? So we've got our warm up and our cool down, and that's great. We've ascertained our level of fitness as per the Equestrian Canada guidelines. We've got the plan. The Equestrian Canada document has a great plan of, you know, do this for this many minutes and this week do this, and that is great. But all of our horses are individuals. They all have specific training needs. So I will preface this next section with, I am not a trainer. However, from a physiological standpoint, what if you have a horse who needs lots of flat work? I would encourage you to take walk breaks often. For a 30 to a 45 minute ride, you want 5 or 6 good walk breaks in there. Allow the horse to reoxygenate those muscles. It actually helps with your horse's focus if you allow him to reoxygenate his muscles and his brain. It sounds silly, but it really can make a difference for some horses. That oxygenation to the muscles and to the brain and to the nervous system can really help, especially if you're asking them to do new things. Maybe you're working on your changes and your horse is having a hard time understanding. What about heavier set horses? So this is my daughter's little quarter horse, and he's a little bit chunky, and that's all right. It takes him a longer time to achieve his base condition because of the difference in the muscle fibers. So he is not built like an off-the-track thoroughbred. It takes him much longer to condition those muscle fibers. I think most of us are familiar with fast twitch and slow twitch muscles. He's much more of a workman. He's got a lot more of the slow twitch, whereas a thoroughbred's going to have a lot more of the fast twitch. That takes different timelines to condition. So again, we have a fabulous guideline, but let your horse tell you, let your horse give you the signs of fatigue. What about horses that are heavy on the forehand? We've all seen those horses. It's a very common problem. Ground-based exercises, stretches, isometric muscle contractions, tummy tucks, carrot stretches, all of those things can be immensely helpful with these horses. Actually, in all programs, which is why I kind of put the note in there, ground exercises can be fantastic, but this is all part of fitness and conditioning when you individualize your program. What about horses who tend to go long and flat? Pole work and cavalettis are very helpful for them, but they are very hard work for those horses. And so you might need to shorten your ride or adjust your program, or adjust the intensity of the program. So again, if you have specific training needs, think of, from a physiologic standpoint, what you're trying to do. So I guess my main message as I was writing this is, let's think before we ride. The main message here that I want you to take home today is to gather all of the information you can to determine your horse's base fitness level. Be mindful of your warm up and cool down. It's not just something that you have to do. It is part of your ride, and it gives you information about your horse. Train thoughtfully and think about fatigue and recovery. So look at your horse. So if you look at this horse in the picture here, if you look between his front legs at the top here, he's standing fairly nice and square, but can you see a difference in the muscle structure of his pectoral muscles right in between his front legs? The one on his right, on our left of the screen, is kind of nice and full, and the one on the right, so his left, our right, is much more tense and tucked up, and that's a horse that's standing squarely. Maybe that's something we should be looking at in our training. Are the muscles fatiguing? We can certainly help with that. And my goal in my practice and with my clients is often to stop problems before they start. And I would hope that, you know, many of you that are here today want that as well. So look at your horse, use a critical eye. You don't have to be a professional or a veterinarian. Just look at your horse and be like, oh boy, the left doesn't look like the right, or whatever it happens to be. It's great information. We're going to talk a little bit about muscle glycogen. So what else can we do to help our horses, which is why we're here today? Glycogen is the muscle fuel, and depletion of glycogen occurs rapidly with the onset of exercise. So they use that glycogen right away. So this is where warm-up is really important, because it switches them over to using another source of muscle fuel. The extent of the glycogen used is related to the amount of lactic acid that was produced. So again, when we're talking about those waste products, if there's a high amount of waste products, we're actually hindering the muscle's ability to do its job and the ability of those muscle fibers to contract, which is what we need them to do. 3-day event horses, this is an old study from 1985, but it's still very relevant. 3-day event horses have a 60% reduction in their muscle glycogen prior to stadium. And a depletion of 78% has been shown to be associated with decreased time to fatigue and decreased aerobic capacity. That's when we're going to injure these horses. So we want to avoid that. And the way that we do that is with an appropriate program, an appropriate warm-up, and an appropriate cool down. Nutrition and electrolyte support. Let's make sure we're providing these horses with appropriate nutrition. There is lots of information out there. It's a little bit of a minefield, so make sure that you use reliable sources. And I think as eventers, we're pretty good about giving our horses electrolytes after cross country, and we kind of know to do that. It's very traditional to give them electrolytes, but remember, they can be very beneficial even in the training phase. When we talk about nutrition, remember that each horse is an individual, so there is no one size fits all. You know, utilize your wellness team. So your veterinarian, routine care, dental care, deworming, vaccination, all of those things are important. I would encourage you to work with your veterinarian, not just on an emergency basis. I think most of us are pretty good at that. You know, but it's a reminder. The farrier, appropriate balanced feet, is huge for not becoming fatigued, not taking those off steps that we all talk about. And body work, massage. Massage decreases pain. It has been shown time and time and time again from a neurologic standpoint. It's a fantastic thing to do. Maybe your horse would benefit from some K-taping or some acupuncture or those types of things just to help him get over the training hump or recover better from fatigue. And so there's lots that we can do. So I think what my goal was today for everybody was, yes, we can absolutely look at that document that's sent out, and it's a great place to start from a cardiovascular conditioning program, but we can do better than that. We can look at the whole horse, and we can look at our whole program and tailor it and individualize it from a rider perspective and from a physiologic perspective to really make sure those horses are going to hit the competitions in tip-top shape. So what I would like you all to do is just do an honest assessment of where your horse is currently and develop an appropriate game plan with your coach. Identify your horse's individual needs, and I want you to think about ridden exercises that will help, non-ridden exercises that will help, so those tummy tucks or stretches or whatever we've chatted about, and think about wellness needs. Maybe your horse needs a little bit of additional support in his feet. Maybe he needs special shoeing. Maybe he has some nutritional needs that not all the horses have, whatever it might be. And reach out to your team, your coach, your veterinarian, your body worker, and make sure that you've got everybody on the same page. I want to thank you for spending your Saturday with me today, and we can certainly throw out the floor for any questions. If you want to unmute and have a chat, that would be great. And Max and I are hoping to see everybody out there this year.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a really nice, informative chat. I guess I can start with the first question.
Sure.
Back to a little bit more of like the trot set type thing.
Yeah.
Talking about like, is there kind of a magic formula for moving up the levels of fitness per week that you're looking at? I know it can,
Oh, you faded out there. Just talk into your microphone.
Oh, can you hear me still?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I was just asking about the magic formula for increasing levels of fitness per week, or what you would be looking at for something like that.
So the old school answer to your question, when we're bringing a horse back from a zero base fitness, so this is a horse that has either had an injury or a sustained period of time off, maybe he spent the whole winter in the field, is you can increase cardiovascular by about 5 minutes per week. And so that's kind of the real base fitness. So you're going to start off doing maybe 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. And then, you can go from there. But really, the answer I like better is we're going to let the horses tell us. Some horses might have lived out in a pasture walking up and down hills all winter. Some horses may have been in a box stall. And this is where I think when we think about the COVID situation, which is a little bit unprecedented, some horses may have been, just because of lack of staff, they may have been in their stall and only turned out in the arena turnout and maybe not ridden. Other horses may have been ridden 5 or 6 days a week by the trainer and maybe fitter than when we didn't ride them. So I think it's a really interesting question and that's why I'm saying to people, just really give your horse an honest assessment. The old school formula is increased by 5 minutes a week of your cardiovascular trot and canter. And usually I tell people to introduce a little bit of canter once they've got 20 minutes of solid trot work.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Thank you. Does anybody else? Oh, yeah. I don't know if you can see these, Sarah, but I'll read it to you.
Oh, you know what? Let me stop sharing my screen and then I think I can see the chat.
Okay.
Oh, yes, there we go. Okay. Super. From a horse starting with a zero base of fitness, what nutritional needs would you look at adjusting or increasing as they get fitter, and what about electrolytes? So it really depends on your horse. I think we know a lot about carbohydrates. So nutritional needs are make sure he would have enough carbohydrate, because when they have a zero base of fitness, it takes them much longer to switch over from using that muscle stored glycogen to the blood sugar, the blood glucose that we're familiar with. And so as we start, that doesn't matter, but over time, we don't want to get into a long-term fatigue fitness. So nutritionally speaking, it would be balancing those sugars. And of course, we know we need to be very careful with sugars. Some horses are very, very sensitive to them. Some horses tend towards more of a metabolic situation. And so those horses, we would look at giving them their food from a fat source rather than a carbohydrate source. But for sure, in terms of calories, as they get fitter, we know we need that. And as they build muscle, they need more protein. So I guess to answer your question, from a zero base of fitness, I would be looking at adjusting their protein and their overall calories, whether that's from a carbohydrate or a fat source. Electrolytes, I think, is really important. I'm a big fan of giving horses electrolytes. My personal horse, when he is competing, gets 2 plain buckets and 1 electrolyte bucket of water. And quite often he chooses to drink a lot of the electrolytes. And when we say electrolytes, maybe it's as simple as providing a salt block. But I think as horses are not very fit, they often sweat a lot. And we do know that horses lose a lot more through sweating than people do. And I think we have to take consideration of that electrolyte loss. There was a lot of work done before the Atlanta Olympics looking at horses, cooling horses and sweating. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but they did a lot of work with misters and cooling the horses, and a lot of work with electrolytes on that. So I think it would just be a case of assessing. But if the horse is getting very sweaty as it's coming back into work and building up that base fitness, I think electrolytes would be a really great thing to provide them. Did that answer your question? Very good.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions? Might as well take advantage of Dr. Sarah while she's here.
I have a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is kind of a little bit different, a little more off topic, but similar, I guess. What do you see or recommend in riding out in grass fields versus sand arenas for conditioning? Like, as someone that personally has a field and a gravel road and a road allowance to ride on and not necessarily access to a sand ring all the time, is there precautions that can be taken for, you know, ligament, tendon injuries, that type of thing?
Sure. So first of all, I would absolutely say I'm with you, because I am in exactly the same position. If you look at the very front picture on the presentation there, it's actually me coming up to a jump on my front lawn. So I am with you. I have a gravel road and a front lawn. So that's all I have too. So what I will say is, for me, I put shoes on my horse quite early in the season, and he goes on the gravel road for a lot of his fitting. I think grass fields are fine in terms of tendons and ligaments. I think over the years, we've really gotten worried about riding our horses on grass. And I don't know why, because that's what they're designed to do. And so I don't think you have to worry about riding on grass. Now, the caveat being, if there's lots of molehills or gopher holes, obviously that's a little bit problematic because they could be prone to injury. But I think if you can do a really good job of the base fitness on your horse walking up and down those gravel roads, if you give him some really good base fitness, even just walking and trotting, then they're less likely to take an off step, and you have no problems conditioning them on a grass field. And so I don't worry about not having a sand ring. Would it be nice to have? Absolutely. But I think if you do a good job of really giving the base conditioning of really honest go, I think you're going to be just fine. So I guess to answer your question, how would I adjust the training program to protect tendons and ligaments? I might be more cautious about really doing a good job of my base level of fitness. So I might give him 12 to 14 weeks of really solid base fitness and then move on to my canter sets and whatnot.
Cool. That really helps. Yeah. Because our base and everything is built long trotting down the road. They spend the winter, climbing up and down a hill. Yeah. Because of winter and not having grass ring or sand ring or indoor arena, they get winters off. It's just kind of how it is. So yeah. Building the base, I guess. And yeah, shoes. Yeah, I totally get that. They get shoes right in the beginning because I don't need bruised soles.
Right. No, and I think that's perfectly acceptable way to do things. And as long as you're aware of it, just maybe be a little bit more pedantic about doing your base conditioning. But if you've got your base, I have no problems riding my horses on grass. It is the original surface that they were supposed to be ridden on. Now, that being said, obviously, if it's super wet or super hard, then we're going to adjust accordingly. But I guess I would just, I would condition my base a little more, but that's really all I would change.
Cool. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I've got another question in the chat there, Sarah.
Can you talk a little bit about heart rates would be normal for during a ride and what heart rates would cause a concern? And if you took a pulse, are we using a heart rate monitor? Absolutely. So horses are amazing from a cardiovascular standpoint. So one of my colleagues a few years ago was working with Dr. Renaud Leguillet at the Calgary Stampede, and they had the remote heart monitors on the horses, the chuck wagon horses. And those horses, the really fit horses, have a resting heart rate of about 28, which is quite low. A normal heart rate is about 32 on a horse. And those horses went from a resting heart rate of 28 beats a minute to over 100 in a matter of seconds, which is kind of shocking when you think about that. And those are really, really, really fit horses. And so There's lots of information out there that you can look up, and everybody's a little bit different, but usually for cardiovascular conditioning, you want to be about 60% of maximum. So for me, I like around 80 if I'm working on conditioning, if I'm doing my sets. But what's really important, and this is where I think people struggle, is it's not about the heart rate itself, because horses have this amazing ability to adjust their heart rate. What it's about is how fast it comes back down to normal. And so it's less about what heart rate would cause a concern at the time. What would cause a concern is a continually elevated heart rate. So if that horse, after he did his canter set, came back to a walk and 5 minutes later still had quite an elevated heart rate, I would be very concerned about that. So it's more about their ability to bring that heart rate down and recover. And there's all kinds of tables out there that you can look at for a horse of, you know, X weight, X size. That's not a problem. And so it's really not a heart rate per se in a split second that concerns me. It's how long that horse takes for its heart rate to recover. And remember, there's lots of causes for that. So again, if we have a horse that's a little bit dehydrated, they don't have as much fluid in their veins and their arteries as they should. It takes them longer to recover. And so it's really the time to recovery that's the focus. The heart rate monitors, the second part of your question here, if you're using a heart rate monitor, I think it's great, because honestly, you've got it right there. But again, you need to know what to do with that information. And so it's really, again, looking at time to recovery. So you do your canter set and then you walk. So I have no problem with horses' heart rates getting high, but they should go up high fast, and then they should come down to resting fast. So it's really the ability to come down that we want to know about. Okay, next question. Oh, good. I'm glad that makes sense. So you went from being able to ride 6 days a week and have a solid fitness bill, riding 3 days a week, keeping condition even with fewer riding days, longer rides. Okay. Yeah. So again, if you had a really great base of fitness from a 6 days a week ride for the previous 6 to 12 months, and we've had probably, I'm guessing, 8 to 10 weeks of a reduced riding, you're not actually going to lose too much. I would absolutely do a longer ride with more walk, because we can condition really well. Are you able to see the horse any more than 3 days a week? Because if it's specifically riding, you can absolutely do ground-based exercises too. And I would encourage you to do that. So I call them horse sit-ups, but a lot of people call them the tummy tucks, where we kind of tickle under their belly and they arch their back. That's a fantastic way of building core, even when you're not riding. And core is so important for all three of our phases for eventing. So I absolutely would add more walk into the ride. And definitely, if you're riding in arena, more walk breaks. So what that does is, like we chatted about a little bit, allows the cardiovascular system to recover. It allows the muscles to get reoxygenated, because when our muscles contract when we're working hard, it actually cuts a little bit of blood flow off in the muscle. And so if you can add in more walk breaks to your ride, you're going to take more of that lactic acid away. You're going to optimize your horse's performance. And those 3 days a week, you're going to get a lot more fitness and a lot less fatigue than you would if you didn't take those. So a couple of things to change. If you have the ability to do in-hand exercises on the days you don't ride, that would be great. And absolutely adding more walk breaks. And you can certainly add more time to the ride, but up the percentage of walk in your ride. I think you'll do yourself a lot of favors. Does that make sense? You're very welcome. Drawing on your chiropractor to lameness side, is there any specific things to look for in terms of compensation and fatigue, specific muscle developments or things to feel or look out for? Oh boy, how long do we got? Okay, so yes. So let's first of all, let's take a little bit of a segue in terms of your muscle development question. So saddle fit, and I know this is a whole can of worms, and I'll just briefly unleash the worms and then we'll put them back in the can. Be really careful about saddle fit after this change in your horse's workload, because that does change quite rapidly. And if we have pressure points of a saddle as they're coming back into work, that can really change things and make it challenging. I should have put that in the talk, and I apologize, I didn't think to put it in the talk. But saddle fit after a change in exercise is going to be very, very important. And so checking the saddle fit, I think, would be something I would look at, because that is specifically a muscle group that we can flag. Things to feel or look for. So stiffness in your horses. Most of us, when we brush our horses, are pretty good about brushing and running our hands. If you notice really sore spots in the muscles, often it's right above the elbow in what's called the long head of the triceps muscle. That can get sore very easily. And sometimes our horse's back right behind the saddle or the hamstrings can get quite sore if they're compensating for certain weaknesses. Fatigue, a really neat trick that most people can do, you don't need anything fancy, is just walk your horse in a straight line in hand. Just walk your horse and look at the difference between the hoof tracks to the left side and the right side. And quite often you'll see them starting to short step with one or both of the hind limbs compared to the start of the ride. It doesn't have to be fancy, but that's a really great way to look for subtle fatigue. And we won't get into it today, but behavioral changes, if your horse seems to switch off, those types of things, if that's happening, then you're really the horse will change his focus, and that can be a sign of fatigue, that maybe he'll begin to stumble or something. So in terms of fatigue as you're riding, probably the biggest thing is look at the footfalls there, or if your horse is starting to trip or seems to not be paying attention, then those are things to notice. Anybody who's worked with me in my practice knows one of my pet peeves is I dislike the term, oh, well, that's just him. I really intensely dislike that. I think we can all think about our horses a lot more. It's just because it's them, it's not normal.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's like some good, really easy to look for. We've got one more.
Okay, I see it. A little different topic, but what's your opinion about the best way to cool a horse off after cross country and intense ride? Here, lots of different opinions on using cold water and warmer water to scrape or not to scrape. Okay, so yes, there are lots of different opinions. Gosh, I'll have to see if I can find the article and post it for you guys. It really depends on what you're trying to do. So the answer is it's both correct. So the cold water is fine to use. It depends. Let me back up. Sorry, guys. So really, it depends on what you're trying to cool out. Are you trying to cool the surface for an immediate cooling? Or are you trying to cool those deeper, deeper, deeper muscles? And so the answer to your question is really for an immediate cool off, yet we hose them with cold water. And what that does is it cools the surface of the skin immediately. And we should not scrape at that point. We should allow evaporation because that's how we're cooling. The second phase and that second sweat that we've talked about is where we might want to use some warmer water and potentially scrape just to allow that muscle. It's going to take sometimes 45 minutes to an hour and a half to get those deeper cooled muscles. So for me, I like the cold water and not scraping immediately. And then I like the warmer water a little later on after the cross country, and I will scrape them at that point. And for me, that makes physiologic sense. You're absolutely right. There's a million different opinions out there. Again, I would encourage you to go back, and I will try and find the link for you guys to all of the work that was done for the Atlanta Olympics and the misting, because there's a ton of information in there. And does using liniment or alcohol in the water help as well? Actually, alcohol is going to speed up the evaporation. And so I think, you know, for me, as far as I'm aware, they have still said that cold water is the best thing. But again, for that second sweat, using a liniment, can help with muscle recovery. We know it makes them feel better. And so using a little bit of alcohol, maybe in that warmer water in the second sweat, wouldn't be a bad thought. But for me, the cold water immediately, we're trying to do something different. We're just cooling the surface temperature of that skin.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
So horses that say have been in a training program seasonally, I guess, for the past, you know, quite a few years, those horses, would it be appropriate to say they're going to have muscles that they know how to use and have been developed over that time. So is it easier for them after winter breaks to rebuild that conditioning in those muscles versus horses that don't even know how to use those muscles, I guess, in younger horses, I guess?
So yes, is the answer to your question. Providing, I don't know if you read the Equine Canada document or not, but yes, providing they're not in what we call those vulnerable groups. So as long as they're not younger than 5 years old or older than 18 years old. So those ones are what I don't particularly like the word, but we call them the vulnerable groups. They're more vulnerable to injury. And so those horses, no, you would expect them to come back. But traditionally, that's what we did with the horses, is they would be ridden and compete in the summer. They would hunt in the fall when they were fit. Then we'd toss them out in the field, and they would have November, December, January off. And it used to be that way in North America as well, that the horses would have the winter off. And now we've gotten to where the circuit goes all year. You can be in competitions all year if you want to travel to the States. My personal opinion is I think it does the horses good to have some time off over winter. And so, yes, I think they come back a little quicker because they have that built up muscle. And this is where it's really important to look at the horse that you have and look at your individual horse. And sure, if your horse is coming back quicker and it's not fatiguing and cardiovascularly it's stable, that's great. But yes, I would expect those horses that are seasonally fit, and my horse definitely fits in that category, they do come back a little quicker for sure.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, last chance for any questions if anybody has anything else. Looks like that might be it for everybody then.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was super informative and really valuable for our membership to have access to.
No problem. And I will try and get you the links to those articles and documents.
That would be great. So we will put this all up for everybody else to see and link a couple of those articles we talked about.
No problem. And if people have further questions that you think of, just hunt me down.
Yes. So again, it's Dr. Sarah Pedersen from Motion Equine. She's based in Airdrie, is very good at performance horses, and that's kind of her specialty. Hit her up. She's amazing.
Bless you. Well, thank you very much. And everyone have a great day. And if we feel that we want to, we can certainly put together series and stuff. So if you want that, let your board of directors know. We'll put something together.
Absolutely. There's more in the works. So we're also happy to take some topics.
Very good. All right. Well, everyone have a fabulous day, and I really hope to see everyone out there. I'm fitting in and training hard right now, team. So hopefully we'll see everyone at some events.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.